Hello students, this is your instructor and I'm going to be talking a little bit about South America. Hope you're having a good week. I wanted to start off with our homepage for the course this week, which is our Science Expedition program, which is going to be going to Guyana this coming summer, so I'm looking forward to this. It'll be my second visit to South America. I had the opportunity to travel to Ecuador some years back, and it was a wonderful experience. Beautiful country with the Andes, which you're seeing an image of, and it descends down into the Amazon basin. This image reminds me of traveling from the crest of the Andes down to the rim of the Amazon basin, and then the coastal Pacific, and also the great exotic island chain of the Galapagos, where Charles Darwin famously did his work. It is also a place of very rich cultural heritage. The ancestors of the Incans live in the Andes, and as we'll learn, this is along with the Amazon basin, one of the two primarily indigenous regions of South America. I thought I would take us on a little run through some of the things that are happening in South America right now. One story is that President Bachelet of Chile is the last woman standing after having three standing presidents that were women in South America in the last 5 years. She is now the sole remaining female president, so it appeared as though they were setting the course for women leading many of the countries, and now only one remains in Chile. This is in what's called the southern cone of South America. So when we look at a map of South America, what we will see is that we have of course, the bounding physical features of the Amazon basin and the Andes, which you see in this map. And this southern end of the continent is the European cone. You find a predominantly European population. This is the temperate zones of South America. And these are countries that have, well, in the case of Buenos Aires, a very large agricultural industry, not unlike what you might find in the Midwest of the United States: cattle grazing, grain production, commercial agriculture production. Chile, this very long, elongated country, has a Mediterranean climate over part of its extent, so they produce a lot of the similar crops you might find in California. Of course, the Amazon basin, this fantastic area that produces not only a fifth of the world's water, but some of its highest biological diversity. And I'm really looking forward to visiting Guyana. Some of the remaining largest extents of remaining wetlands are found in Guyana. The Andes, as I said, predominantly Amerindian and generally quite poor. So the countries of Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, these predominantly indigenous countries that make up the Andes. And then we have this northern tier along the Caribbean that include Venezuela, Colombia, what I like to call the Guyanas, the country of Guyana, once British, French Guiana, still a colony, and Suriname, three countries along the Caribbean coast. Continuing on with a look at the news, we have a story here that Vice President Pence is warning that Venezuela is at risk of becoming a failed state. This is a geographic term for a country that has basically lost its ability to govern its own people. But Latin America condemns the Trump administration's threat of invasion. This is a country that has great oil resources, but has been in the throes of a constitutional crisis. You have an opposition party that has mobilized people taking to the streets, and a very heavy-handed response by the government in power. So this is a real area of concern along the Caribbean. Brazil is the giant of South America, and interestingly, first Brexit, now Braxit, Brazil faces split as southern states want to form a new country. So we see this trend, the reference to Brexit in England, and this is a interesting development, especially in light of the fact that Catalonia, which is the region of Spain that recently voted independence from Spain, and this is an example of what we call a devolution, a separatist movement that is threatening to split countries apart as ethnic groups want to claim their own sovereignty. And so these are very destabilizing forces that are taking place in the world today, and something that is a concern to many. Okay, so we'll return to kind of just talking through some things by looking at the world map. One of the things, of course, we think of Latin America as being predominantly Spanish speaking. There's this great tradition of great, in some respects, and highly destructive in other respects, the colonialism that pretty much transformed the entire continent. And so Spain and Portugal effectively divided the continent, and this line that is a meridian of longitude was actually used as the dividing line, where Portugal was to be given everything to the east of that line, Spain everything to the west of that line. Of course, Brazil is the one Portuguese-speaking country, and again, we're talking in the top 5 countries in the world in terms of geographic area and in terms of its population. It's also a high-ranking country in terms of its economic productivity, and you have a fairly wealthy population that lives in cities, coupled with very high degrees of poverty. We see some of the most extreme wealth disparity in South America that we see anywhere in the world, and this is embodied by a movement of rural people into cities in squatter settlements that are known as favelas in Brazil, and barrios in the Spanish-speaking countries. And these are areas that are considered to be part of the informal economy. They're unregulated, they're untaxed. You have people that are basically building homes on very steeply sided hill slopes, in many cases stealing electricity, and creating effectively their own police force, their own educational systems. And you have fences and walls that are protecting them from the wealthier developed areas. Indeed, this was something that was enforced heavily during the recent Olympics in Brazil, where the poor, indigent, oftentimes service workers that served the wealthier areas were effectively blocked out and locked out of the areas where a lot of the Olympic venues were taking place. Brazil has long had a policy of trying to encourage migration into the Amazon basin. This has been very damaging to the ecology of the area, as peasants are being given land that can be, and they are encouraged to clear that land, often for cattle ranches that are productive for only a year or two in the heavy tropical rains before the land is spent and they must move on to another area. Increasingly, what we find taking place now is massive industrial agricultural operations growing things like soybean for global demand, and again at the cost of this extremely high biological diversity that is a real jewel of the planet, and also something that is vital for the health of biodiversity and for the climate and elsewhere. So some significant concerns and challenges that South America faces, coming to grips with their colonial past. We have a long history of violent revolutions in countries from Argentina to on down the, Chile, Bolivia. These are countries that have in different times had quite a violent political past. And then there's the country of Colombia that many have argued has been effectively a failed state for many years, in spite of having a geography that includes access to both the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, highly diverse landscapes, mountains, forests, agricultural lands, and yet a insurgency on the border with Venezuela, that you have cocoa growing. Many of us think of the drug trade associated with Colombia. And they've shown some signs of pulling out of this and becoming a stronger country, but they have this legacy that is still quite problematic. Fascinating part of the world, and I look forward to engaging more with you on this online. Thanks for listening, and we'll check in with you soon.